Hello, everyone. My name is Gitika Gorthy, and today I am very honored to be interviewing a very special space champion, Miss Britt Duffy Adkins. Britt is the first space urban planner and founder of Celestial Citizen. She is passionate about the intersection of urban planning, engineering, science, and social justice as humans look to build new societies in space. She also hosts the Celestial Citizen podcast, where she looks to spark unique conversations about the human factors that will be essential to our long term survival and evolution into a spacefaring civilization. She is currently enrolled at the University of Southern California's Price School of Public Policy, pursuing a Master of Urban Planning. She also graduated from the MIT-Wellesley Double Degree program and the Colorado School of Mines, where she received her Master of Science in Space Resources. As you can see, Britt is really educated and very involved in the space industry, and I'm very excited to be able to understand her journey on a deeper level. Thank you so much for taking your time to inspire the future generations. I'm so excited to talk with you.
Thank you. I'm excited to talk with you as well. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, before we get into understanding what really drove you into space and choosing a really unique career, could you first tell us more about your typical day? What does it look like and how does it run?
Yeah, absolutely. So my typical day, it starts usually with a wake-up call from my kids.
Aw.
So I'm a mom of three, so usually the mornings are a little bit more chaotic than they were in my pre-children years. But the day kind of starts with just trying to get everybody getting to where they need to go. And so my husband and I sort of balance that effort, get the kids off to preschool or summer camp or wherever it is they're going. And then basically I start my day. And, as with many people during this pandemic, I am working from home, which is kind of a nice experience because you're both sort of around, but also still, obviously kind of carved off doing your own thing during the day. So then I typically spend my morning catching up on emails, doing research that I need to do. I try to really keep up to date with a lot of reading and things like that that's relevant to all the work that Celestial Citizen is doing. Often have a handful of meetings. And then, of course, because of the podcast, I'm often recording as well. So usually my days are sort of full of recording sessions as well, which is always fun. And then around, I guess, lunchtime, my youngest is still at home, so I try to have lunch with him, and then work sort of the rest of the day up until dinner time, and then spend that with the kids. And lately, they've all been wanting to end the day with a dance party, so that's pretty fun way to sort of relieve some stress. And then usually after they go to bed, I sort of hop back on to working again, and for a few hours. So with a startup, you're sort of working whenever you can. So it's sort of around the clock, but, making a lot of time for fun as well.
Yeah, that's amazing. I'm so glad to hear that you're also a mother and you're still balancing everything. It's amazing to see, such dedicated individuals who are doing everything. I don't know how you guys balance your time, but it's truly remarkable to hear. And you were also mentioning you have a podcast, and I also mentioned that in your introduction. And I'm really curious, what motivated you about starting the Celestial Citizen podcast and what's your vision for it?
Yeah, absolutely. So the podcast really came out of the original idea for Celestial Citizen, which was sort of born out of an interest that I had long had when I was in undergrad. I studied urban studies and planning, and I had actually worked in a lot of different fields before getting into the space industry. But when I did, I sort of broke into it through the Colorado School of Mines Space Resources program. And it was during my time in that program that I started really attending a lot of conferences and talking to a lot of different people. And there was so much interest in sort of developing habitats or thinking about the first bases or eventually, even cities that would appear on the moon and Mars. And that really captured my interest, of course, because of, having a background in city planning. And so it occurred to me that there was really a gap, that there was this missing piece of knowledge that was going into that planning. So when I'd go to these conferences, they'd be all focused on only the engineering side of how we would think about future society in space. And to me, that was a huge miss because, of course, urban planning in general, it's a very transdisciplinary, complex subject, and it involves many different, experts along the way to sort of go about planning that. So where I saw a real opportunity to add value to the space industry was by, trying to say it, loud for everyone to hear, that we needed to integrate more of an urban planning mindset to some of that, future work that we'd be doing in space, so that we don't make a lot of the same mistakes that we've made here on Earth. So integrating not only an engineering technical perspective to how we go about living, surviving, working, and thriving in space, but then also adding in sort of the social, the cultural, the political, and economic aspects of it as well too. And so out of that, I realized as I was starting to sort of carve out this niche almost, it was very clear to me that there were a lot of people in the space industry with, we could call it non-traditional backgrounds, or even just like really unique research areas. And so the more I started to connect with those people, have conversations with them, it really occurred to me that these conversations needed to be public for everyone, because it's a real benefit to society to hear all these different, voices and ideas about what the future might look like. And so that's really where the idea for the podcast came from is, I thought, well, what better way to go about, hearing and sharing all these stories and ideas for the future than by putting it, on a platform that everybody can access.
Wow, that is absolutely amazing just to hear like your inspiration and motivation behind the podcast. And that got me thinking, how did you come up with the unique intersection between urban planning and space? Because you said originally you didn't study to go into the space industry. So I'm really curious about what really got you into it, because I myself am interested in aerospace medicine, and that's like a little bit more common, I would say, but people are still shocked to be like, wait, what do you mean space and medicine together? So I'm curious, how did you come across your career?
Yeah, that's a great question. And aerospace medicine, by the way, that's a great field to be getting into. So, best of luck with that. You're already well on your way, I'm sure. But yeah, I mean, I think for me, it was sort of like these conference experiences where I was going and I was sitting there seeing people present ideas around what a Mars colony would look like. And immediately I was sort of like, oh my goodness, that's problematic language to start, right? There's a lot of issues just in how we're phrasing things already. But aside from just, the rhetoric being used, it was also seeing how people were thinking about it and really feeling like there was this disconnect of not having enough, human considerations into the design. And then also just there being this sort of lapse of really like nobody on any of these teams really considering the social and cultural and political side of it as well. So just sort of feeling like it was interesting, I guess, for me to see that people were planning cities in space without city planners. Like to me, that seemed pretty obvious, but at the same time, I think it's very interesting. And actually, when you look back, I've since done some research into, around the Apollo era, basically, or after the Apollo era, there was less funding that was going towards NASA. And so it's really interesting because if you look at the history of that, there were a lot of engineers that then were actually taken from NASA because people thought, oh, these engineers, they're geniuses, they know how to work with complex systems. So let's have them move into the urban planning field. And then I think that, and there was actually a book, Cure for Chaos, by Simon Rameau. And it's really interesting because in a lot of ways that kind of misses the point, in that people, I think, oftentimes think that the social, the more human aspects of life are the simple ones to solve somehow, which to me is fascinating because it's completely the opposite. Those are the really tough challenges to solve, ultimately. So I think that it's interesting that we've pulled engineers from the space industry into urban planning historically to sort of get help in thinking about how we might solve some of the different challenges going on in urban environments. But we've never really thought about the fact that urban planners could be quite useful to the space industry. And so that's really what, part of the message that I'd like to spread. And, as Celestial Citizen has evolved, it's also become, to me, it's not only just about the space urban planning side of things, but it's also through the podcast, I've realized that media is such an important way of connecting and engaging with people across all walks of life who may be a part of the space industry, but might be outside of it as well. And it's so important that we include everyone in this conversation and we really try to hear what everybody has to say, because no matter who you are, if you are a celestial citizen, right, which I believe is everybody on this planet and wherever we go next, then you have the right to have an opinion. You absolutely do. And we absolutely want to hear it. And I think that's the key thing, is understanding that media is a really powerful tool. So Celestial Citizen is now, moving towards more into becoming a space media startup, but still really has those embedded urban planning values of trying to have a really transdisciplinary focus and also encouraging public participation as one of like the key values of the company broadly, in terms of like trying to engage and understand what a broader audience of people are looking for in space, so that we can make space a lot more equitable and inclusive. So it's not just necessarily something that's been carved off for the privileged few.
Yeah, there's so many amazing points that you're bringing up. I think the ones that really stood out to me was the importance of media, like you were mentioning. I think with the recent commercial launches by so many reputable companies has really brought traction to the space industry, whether it be on social media or on the web. Like all I hear is like, oh, maybe just because I look at space news a lot, but also it just seems like on social media, a lot more people are talking about space, which is really exciting to just see, because it's like now younger generations and more people outside of the industry will start paying attention and be like, what's happening here? So it's really exciting that people are starting to get more involved in the industry. It's becoming more accessible and open. And also, I'm really glad to see that you were able to find that intersection between two of your interests and kind of develop a career. And I think that's something that I really push for and advocate for. In school, we tend to kind of be like, math, science, history, and then that's it. But there's a lot more careers that you can like put together and, figure out your dream job essentially. So that's really inspiring to hear. Thank you for sharing that.
Thank
My
you.
next,
Absolutely.
yeah. And I was, you probably have had some amazing experiences. You've had a lot of opportunities to go to different universities. So I'm curious, what is the most exciting project or research that you've worked on?
Yeah, well, gosh, that's a tough question, because I feel like I've been, very fortunate to work on a lot of really interesting projects and things like that over the years. I'd say most recently, though, actually, and this is with Celestial Citizen, but we are currently working on a Celestial Women project, which, I can't necessarily go into too many of the details just yet. I will say that it is going to be premiering later this fall. So definitely keep an eye out for that and for updates on it on social media. But essentially, the project is really trying to shine a light on the realities of what it's like to be a woman in STEM and a woman in the space industry, and trying to hear from a really diverse range of women who have experienced all different, corners of the space industry. And when when I had the idea to start this project, I didn't necessarily know, okay, how many people are going to want to participate? How are we going to go about structuring this? And I will say that it has just been overwhelming, the level of support and excitement that there has been from women around participating in this project. And ultimately, the idea is to not only shine a light on the realities, but also to really highlight the strength of all of these women, and how they really have an empowered stance on their future, and what they're hoping for themselves and other women that come after them in the space industry as well. So I think there can never be enough opportunities for people to be able to tell their stories. And that's really one of the key things with Celestial Citizen, is we really just want to encourage and give people a platform to tell their stories in what, we hope is a safe space. So that honestly, that project has been like, even just talking about it kind of gives me chills, because it's been such rewarding, work to be doing. It's a really, I'll be honest, it sometimes is a little bit, heartbreaking at times to hear, some of the things that people have shared, but ultimately this feels like some of the most important work that I've gotten to participate on, especially with Celestial Citizen. So So that, and of course, also just gearing up for season 2, which is premiering August 26th. We've got lots of great interviews lined up for that. So I'm excited to sort of get some, some additional really, really unique perspectives on the space industry. So excited for that. And other than that, not a lot of people know this, but I actually do some volunteer research on the side with an exoplanet researcher at Caltech, Dr. Jesse Christensen. So that's also been really exciting work. And just, exoplanets are such an interesting topic. So it's been really eye-opening to just kind of have that shift of perspective once again. And that's something I like to do, and I encourage everybody who's trying to get into the space industry to do. Is there's so many different areas to be interested in. You should never close yourself off to exploring different avenues, because the more you explore, the more you sort of have these paradigm shifting events where you think about the world, the universe very differently. So
Yeah. Wow, that's first of all incredibly inspiring. I mean, a podcast kind of not like part of the podcast really dedicated to highlighting the diverse experiences women have had in the space and STEM industry is absolutely amazing, because I know that not only to just hear those stories, because a lot of the women are not recognized, people don't know about them and what they've been through, but also kind of like educating future generations, future women in STEM, kind of like showing them that this is what you have to expect when you're going into the industry and things that you have to overcome. Look at like just off the lessons of these other women, because a lot of the times we notice that a lot of females go into university with a STEM career and usually just kind of declines by the time they graduate with a STEM degree. And I think a lot of the reasons because they just don't expect to be the only girl in a physics classroom sometimes, or they don't expect to be the only girl in a space club. So I think sometimes just talking about those reality can really get people prepared for what's to come. And I think that will create a more successful rate in the future. So definitely, I'm so glad you're doing that podcast and really shedding light on all these amazing women who have been through a lot, but also accomplished a lot. So it's absolutely amazing.
yeah, and I think you also bring up a really great point there, which is that it's very hard to envision yourself in a field, in a career, unless you actually see somebody who you can see yourself in, who's already there. And so I think that that's a really key thing. And you're right. I think for the younger women that are coming up, it's also really important that we are sort of honest about what the realities of of the field can be like. And while there's many positive attributes and reasons why you would want to go into the space industry, it's terribly exciting, it's super inspiring, but there is a side to it as well that I think it's important to share, because coming out of, I did my undergrad, as you mentioned, at like MIT and Wellesley, and Wellesley in particular was such an empowering environment for young women. It was really fantastic. But I think ultimately when I actually entered the workforce, I wasn't entirely prepared for the fact that I would sort of almost take a step back. So I went from being in an environment where I felt like I was very empowered and very much encouraged to speak my mind and all of these different things. And people, didn't question, necessarily whether or not I was up to the task. And then to go into the workplace and see that and be faced with it, it can be really discouraging. And I think for a lot of women, it can also be a reason why they exit STEM and space fields. So that's the real thing that I think we want to avoid. We talk a lot about getting young women into STEM, which is obviously very important, but how do we also maintain and keep them in these STEM fields so that they don't get discouraged and leave? So I just wanted to highlight that because you brought up a really great point there, which is very important.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's one of the main focuses of many organizations is really to keep women in STEM. And I'm definitely looking forward to the different, the ratios kind of changing, because definitely we're making progress. And there's so many amazing organizations like the Brooke Owens Fellowship, just empowering females. So I'm really excited for the future. And so I'm curious to also kind of understand. So you went into kind of going into first urban like city planning and science and technology, but what moment did you realize you liked space? Like, was there a specific moment, or were you like a space fan ever since you were a little kid?
No, well, Sort of. I mean, I was as a young kid, I had so many different interests. So I loved science in school, but I would never say that that was like, I'm not one of those people that figured it out from a really early age. Quite the opposite. Which I think is hopefully encouragement for people who might be, a little bit later in life. And it's never really too late. It's never too late to change what you're doing, to pivot into a new career. Um, but I guess for me, and it sounds kind of silly, but I think this also speaks to just the importance of media again. Um, so it was really around the time that actually Interstellar came out, and I saw Interstellar, and I was like, wow, this is like really fascinating and so interesting. And I found myself kind of reading up on, okay, which parts of this were like, somewhat could be theoretically feasible, which ones couldn't. So I was kind of just really curious about it and really inspired by it. Um, and I never thought that even in that moment that I would, pivot into a new career. But then, I came across an event that was going on actually at USC, which was talking about space architecture. And I found that to be really fascinating because obviously I had my degree at Wellesley was in architecture, and I had never come across the topic of space architecture at any point. And so I was very interested to learn more about that. So, kind of on a whim, I decided to fly out to Los Angeles, and I participated in this student event. And actually, Madhu Tongavelu, who's one of the early guests on my podcast from last season, and he was giving a talk, and he also showed the group of students this short film called Wanderers by Eric Warnquist. And I was just so amazed by this future that could potentially be, sort of within our grasp or within the future generation's grasp. And I was really excited by that. So I initially started out where I was kind of interested in exploring, space architecture, and then it evolved from there, right? I realized that actually where my true passion lied was sort of more in thinking about the urban planning side of things and the overall, sort of idea of how we can improve society, not only here on Earth, but also, for the future in space. And yeah, so I guess that's kind of the moment. I mean, it probably was kicked off with Interstellar, and I hear that a lot. I hear even people that were, growing up and watched Cosmos, and that was really it for them. But I think this just speaks to the power of media in inspiring people, and that it's never too late to reach somebody. I mean, I was in my 20s at that point by the time that I had realized that this was a very deep, very serious passion of mine. I feel lucky that I uncovered it at some point, and relatively still very early in life. But yeah, I just encourage everybody, it's never too late, and it's never too late to sort of nurture an interest in something different.
Of course, I always like advocate that age is not a boundary, which you can be taking in any way. Whether you're a young student, age is not a boundary to do anything, or whether you're older, it's not too late to change a career. So definitely age is never a boundary. But also you were mentioning how you thought it was silly that you thought like you got it from a movie, but actually, literally, I'm sure 90% of the people I interviewed kind of had a similar response to you, which is kind of funny
Really?
and definitely speaks to the whole media. Everybody was always like, there was this movie or there was this event or situation that really happened. And for me, there was definitely the Air and Space Museum near my house, but also the movie The Martian kind of also really impacted me because I was like, it would be epic to live in Mars. So I
Mhm.
think definitely between the both of them, I can see how movies, media, books, even museums, it's just those small things when you're a child actually mean a lot more. And yeah, I totally agree with your response. So that's awesome to see that you still were able to uncover your passion and now you love what you're doing, which is what matters at the end of the day.
Yeah,
And so,
absolutely. And
yeah.
now it's funny because I think we're actually from the same area. I actually grew up in Northern Virginia.
Oh,
So yeah, which it's funny. I didn't necessarily, I think I went to the Air and Space Museum maybe once in like my late teens or something like that. But now it's funny because before moving out to LA, we still lived in the area, and my kids already at like such a young age were just like enamored with it. So you're right, museums too are another great area where we just can't understate the importance of them in terms of really influencing people and sort of inspiring them.
yeah. Well, I didn't know you lived in Northern Virginia. So that's funny. That's great. Yeah, so like another question that I did have is throughout this journey that you did have so far, were there obstacles that came along your way? And if so, how were you able to overcome those obstacles?
Yeah. I think so. In terms of obstacles specific, I mean, over the course of my professional career, I've definitely experienced quite a few, but I guess specific to the space industry, I think one of the first ones is an imposter syndrome, right? To an
Mhm.
extent, because it's also when you're trying to sort of create something new, which I was trying to do with space urban planning. It took me a while to get really confident in myself and like really being like, okay, this is what you're meant to do. This is, the path that you're meant to be on, because it is a little bit easy sometimes to look around and say, okay, well, look at all these people with these, fantastic backgrounds and things like that. And they might be years ahead of you, even in terms of, how many years. Sorry for the background noise. My dog must be barking at something. But anyway, it can sometimes be intimidating um, to sort of look around and see that these people have been maybe in the field for like 15 years prior. So I think some of it was that I really had to grow confident in my own abilities, and the fact that all of my different experiences, even prior to the space industry, really shape and inform my perspective. And that's a positive. So I've really become a big advocate for sort of like that outsider perspective, because I think sometimes when you're only ever inside an industry, it can be easy to sort of miss things, right? It can, even as we talk about, with the billionaire space race that just happened. And for a lot of us within the industry, we were super excited. This is a really inspirational event. But if we actually take a look at sort of people who, maybe view themselves as falling outside of the space industry, at least at present, they had a very different reaction to it. And that's really valid. And we have to understand that. And so I think really trying to move away from feeling like because I was different, somehow that made me less. And now I feel like because I'm different, that actually means I can bring more to the table in a lot of conversations. So I'd say that was one of the biggest challenges. And, the other challenge, of course, is like it's definitely not easy to balance motherhood and then being in the space industry as well. Um, I think sometimes not, I think this is starting to change, but I think a lot of times people sort of look at you a little bit differently when they learn that you have kids, and sort of they question whether or not you'll be able to, sort of step up to the plate and achieve what you want to achieve. And I mean, those are clearly people who have never met mothers, because mothers are some of the most multitasking, like strong people in terms of their ability to be able to manage a lot of different things all at once. So I think, that's another challenge that I still do face to a certain extent. And then, I mean, and then also just generally, I think being a woman in the industry, despite, whatever academic background you have, still being questioned whether you're technical enough to do something, still being questioned about whether or not you have the requisite skill set. So I'd say those are sort of like all of the, sort of the major challenges. And then of course, as with most people, right, the pandemic was a tough time, I think, for working parents. And so that was a big challenge, because honestly, Celestial Citizen, I had the idea, months prior to the actual launch, but, due to the pandemic and just kind of constraints around that, it did delay things. So for a while there, that was actually really tough, because it's tough to like have it, have an idea, but just quite literally, and I'm not alone in this. Many people felt those circumstances as well, or much worse. So in many ways, I feel very fortunate to have had the support that I did have, but it still was very challenging to sort of have to accept that things were going to move a little bit slower for a certain period of time. But anyway, but regardless, I mean, the important thing is that you just keep going and you just keep pushing and you never give up on what you want to do. And so whatever hurdles you come across, know that like once you get to the other side of them, you will be stronger for them. And nothing that is really worthwhile is ever going to come without some challenges. So, just keep persevering.
That's amazing advice. I know a lot of individuals have faced imposter syndrome. And I thank you for giving that advice of how to overcome it. I feel like a lot of times we see successful individuals and we're like, oh, they're perfect. I mean, how can I ever become like them? But hearing how like you were able to overcome those obstacles to get to where you are now really like provides support and almost confidence to everyone else that they can, also grow themselves by overcoming these obstacles that they're facing right now. So definitely very inspirational. And kind of going a little bit away from your research, kind of going towards your interest, I'm curious on what excites you and what makes you nervous about the future of the space industry.
Yeah, so I think what excites me about it is that there's just so much happening right now. Like
Yeah.
it seems like we're now living in this golden age of sort of, events and launches and things like that happening all the time. And so it sort of feels like every couple of months, if not even sooner, we're sort of like getting a big new exciting announcement. So I feel like that is really exciting to see. I also think that just in general, like you alluded to this earlier, but the amount of chatter on Twitter or social media or the amount of media coverage that the space industry is getting, I think that all of that is super exciting and encouraging for, hopefully, getting more people sort of to be space enthusiasts. And also, I think there's starting to be a lot more conversation around how do we be more thoughtful going forward in sort of the work that we're doing? How do we think about exploration in a different way that hopefully is more just in the future? And so I think that just the sheer fact that a lot of those conversations are happening, that there are a lot of people, both on the academic side and also on the nonprofit side, that are really dedicated to having those conversations and encouraging those sorts of debates are really critical, I think, for moving forward. We should really be encouraging as many diverse viewpoints on these topics as possible. I think in terms of what worries me a little bit is the fact that it's kind of twofold, right? Like it's a double-edged sword. Things are moving really fast, which is exciting, but also from the perspective of somebody, like myself, who has a planning background, where I sort of prefer for things to be, really thought out, or we're really trying to sort of get this broad level of engagement before we commit to certain decisions. That is sort of an area where I'm very concerned. And I'm very concerned that despite the fact that there are a lot more voices that are starting to, sort of pop up and talk about these issues, the space industry is still, especially from a commercial side, is still largely dominated by a very, very privileged, wealthy group of white men. And so I'm still not seeing the representation that I would like to see. And I'm still not necessarily seeing the commitment to engaging the public in the same way. I think sometimes in the space industry, there is this unfortunate thing that happens where people are so passionate about it that they really want their projects, their missions to get approved and funded, and they want to move forward. So if anybody comes in and says, okay, but we also need to consider these viewpoints, or have you thought about this? They sort of immediately go on the defensive because they don't want anything to happen to delay what we're doing. And I think that's a real missed opportunity, because sustainable futures in space are the kind that have taken into consideration a lot of these, these social and political elements and things like that as well. So if we really actually want to achieve a lasting presence in space, one that's less polarizing and one in which more people feel included and excited about it, then naturally we would want to take into consideration all of those different perspectives ahead of time. So I don't actually view it as a delay in the long run. I think in the near term, of course, some people will view it as perhaps a delay, but I think it's an important one, and it's an important step to take. So overall, I'd say that's where my big concern is that a lot of the public, I don't think, is actually fully aware of how quickly things are moving and all of the commercial activity that is planned for the lunar surface, and eventually beyond. And I think that we need to really start thinking about how we sort of embrace the public in these conversations and bring everybody along with us, because unfortunately, I think if we don't have those voices, then unfortunately a lot of that decision making is still going to be done by a not very representative sample, which is really doomed to sort of make the same mistakes that we've made here on Earth. So that's the thing that keeps me up at night, and that's why I think we really need to try to make space a lot more inclusive, and try to engage people that aren't necessarily traditionally in the industry. You don't need to have a master's degree. You don't need to have a space background to be able to participate in these conversations, right? And that's the real thing that we need to move away from, is this idea that somehow you have to be an expert in order to be able to have an opinion. And that's just simply not true.
Yeah, those are some amazing points. Of course, we want everything to be fast. We'd love to see the change coming, but also we have to be very cautious about every step that we're taking, because they could have longer term implications that we're not taking seriously right now. So definitely those are some amazing points that really encapsulate, and also the fact about diversity. It's really exciting that the Artemis mission is happening. I think that's like a step in the right direction, but of course, kind of taking into consideration the general public's opinions and viewpoints in this global issue and global project is definitely going to be necessary. And so my last and final question for you to wrap up the interview, kind of combining your research and journey as well, is what advice do you have for young students, maybe around high school or college, regarding their pursuit of passion, the STEM field, space industry, really anything that they want to pursue, something that you wish someone has told you when you were a young student yourself?
Yeah, that's a great question. So one of the things that I often think about, and I really try not to have any regrets, because I ultimately think that whatever your path in life is, you will get there one way or another, like what is meant for you. And so ultimately, though, I do feel like what I really want to encourage people who are, in maybe middle school or high school, is to just expose yourself to as many different areas of STEM research as possible. So whether, that's in the space industry or somewhere else, I think that, at that point in time too, like your brain is just like exploding with new ideas, and it's such a great time in life. And so I think if you can just sort of expose yourself to as many different areas of interest as possible, and just kind of follow those curiosities, right? Like be curious, and look into a lot of different areas. We're also living in this golden age of where there's a lot of free content online. So whether it be on YouTube, listening to different podcasts, or even like I've taken a number of edX and Coursera classes, right, which are a fantastic resource for people that might say, I'm really kind of interested in something, but I don't know if it's worth like the financial commitment, right? Or maybe I don't have the ability to be able to pay to take this class somewhere else. So I think having that be more readily available to people, and sort of making use of all those free resources is really helpful. The other thing that I would say is learn how to code, right? Like that's something where I've definitely been starting to explore with the research that I've been doing on the astronomy side. And so it's such a useful tool for the future across many different categories. So I've now done a little bit of coding on the urban planning side, even looking at urban data, and starting to understand like how we can be less biased in the way that we think about what's going on in cities. Of course, even with data management, we have to be careful, because there can be a lot of bias just even baked into that, and even when we think we're extracting it. But I think it's such a useful skill set. And then, just for the future, something to think about. I just recently had a webinar with the Space Generation Advisory Council that was specifically talking about the use of geospatial data for making more sustainable cities and communities in the Caribbean. And so I think one of the key takeaways from that conversation with that group, which was really fascinating, was just that whoever is, sort of has access to data, they're really empowered. They can be really empowered by it. And so understanding how to access and manipulate data is very helpful. I think it's a very helpful tool for young people to start to learn. So all of those things are really important, and don't be afraid to reach out to people. That's networking is a huge thing too. It can be scary, but honestly, over the course of my career, I have cold called or cold emailed so many different people and have been really surprised by how gracious they've been with their time and their advice. And that's also been really helpful in starting to understand, where I might fit into the industry. So I think those would be my big pieces of advice for young people. Just be curious and keep looking for any opportunity to get exposed to different areas.
Yeah, I 100% agree. When you're in middle school and high school, you have the opportunity to be a part of so many different clubs and activities. So definitely taking advantage of that to explore what really excites you and makes you curious and stay up at night is definitely, explore and find that passion. And also the point you were saying about networking, I can definitely vouch for that. I didn't expect to be able to interview amazing individuals like yourself, and it was only I was able to do that through social media like LinkedIn or Twitter. And it's amazing how many people are willing to give an hour of their day to really do this, and it's amazing. So I definitely can vouch that networking on social media especially can be very beneficial, because otherwise I can't like travel across the world to meet these individuals. So the virtual platform is definitely amazing, and there's so many people willing to help you and mentor you. So I can definitely vouch for that advice that you gave. So I want to thank you so much for taking your time. You gave some amazing advice as well as a lot of insight into kind of urban planning as well as with space, which is a unique career. And I'm sure many individuals who are interested in that artistic side will definitely enjoy hearing your story. So thank you so much for sharing your journey. And we can't wait to see the amazing things you continue to accomplish.
Oh, well, thank you so much. It's been so fun talking with you today. And once again, I think the work that you're doing is absolutely fantastic.
Yeah.
And it's I mean, this in and of itself is such a great resource for people who are interested in the space industry. So, I mean, honestly, if I were a young person, I would be watching every single one of your YouTube interviews, because they really are very interesting looks into different avenues that people can take. So thank you so much for reaching out. This was a really great opportunity. So I appreciate it.
Thank you so much.